Back in the early days of Satisfactory, I made a video about how to organize your factories, which basically boiled down to shoving all of your spaghetti into the basement, and maybe a few practical tips while I was at it. But since I made that video, there have been so many great quality of life updates to Satisfactory that it's easier than ever to be organized. So in this video, I'm going to cover the tools you can use, as well as a few of my favorite specific methods for staying organized in this game. And if you like what you see, be sure to like the video and subscribe to Satisfactory News. Snapping. Nothing makes your factory feel more like a mess than just kind of haphazardly placing all of your factory items. Especially when starting a new game, this feels difficult to avoid. But there are a ton of snapping and special building mode features in the game these days, so it's easier than ever to be organized and clean even right from the start. Straight build mode for belts and pipes is the first solution. This allows you to make perfect right angles with your belts, even if you're just building on the ground. Next is align to grid. This is used firstly to place foundations on the world grid. Holding the control key while placing a foundation will snap it to this invisible grid, meaning all of your factories can be on the same grid and are able to be connected to each other easily as long as you do this all across the map. And then once you have one foundation down, you can just build off of it. But it also partially functions even without foundations. So if you're placing something like a constructor just on the ground, you can't place it on the grid by holding control. You have to just kind of place it wherever you want. But once you have the first one down, you can hold control while placing additional buildings and they will snap to the existing one. You'll see a guideline and feel the building be almost magnetized along it. You can also use this when placing additional buildings along the production line or putting down splitters and mergers. You'll see a guideline connecting the inputs and outputs and it will sort of be magnetized to that guideline. This method means that even before you start placing down foundations, you can have an organized factory free of spaghetti belts. It does still work on foundations as well, and it's super useful for aligning things properly all throughout the game. Create dedicated factories. Once you start expanding, you can clean up your factory layout by building a specific factory for specific parts. In what people generally call outpost factories, satellite factories, or modular factories. Turns out there's a lot of names for these. So in one area, you can produce a ton of concrete. In another area of the map, you can build plastic and rubber. Somewhere near oil nodes, probably. This is in contrast to belting every raw material into your main base. Ideally, you do this all the way up the chain as long as possible. For an example, in my playthrough, I chose to make my computers and supercomputers in the desert. It makes these items and a few advanced space elevator parts that require them. Mostly I need iron and copper, and those items are found plentifully in the desert, which is why I built it there. But, as you might know, you also need plastic and rubber for some of these computer components. But there aren't any oil nodes in the desert itself, though there are some somewhat nearby. So I use a train to bring in that plastic and rubber, which are produced elsewhere on the map. And sure, I could have piped in the raw oil or belted in the plastic and rubber once it was processed, but it made the most sense with the infrastructure and just ease of use to use a train. But, really you can use whatever you want. But that plastic and rubber is the only thing that has to be imported for this factory, and I'm able to be pretty efficient with how far I'm transporting materials otherwise. This computer factory is otherwise pretty self-contained and doesn't intermix with my main base at all. It just has a few satellite operations bringing in random materials, but I don't have to go all the way across the map for it. And since I'm building space elevator parts here, I can also put down the space elevator on this factory, so it's even more self-contained. I don't have to send space elevator parts back to my main base where the space elevator might be and load them up there. I can just do it here. So I don't actually have to export anything from this factory, but if I did, it would probably only be one or two end products that go into something more advanced, and that maybe makes sense to build elsewhere on the map. But currently, I don't have to, it's all self-contained. Putting a ton of smaller systems like this can keep you organized by reducing the amount of belts or vehicles that have to go back and forth and cross over each other. All that being said, building a single central base with everything in it is super cool and impressive, so you can totally still do that if that's how you want to play the game. Just know that it will be more difficult to keep clean. To-do list. Satisfactory has a built-in notepad that can be used for keeping track of, notes. Sure, you can use pen and paper or a notes app on your PC, but it's nice to not have to tab out of the game. This note-taking functionality is built into the to-do list feature, which you can access by going to the build menu and clicking the plus sign on an item to add it. The to-do list will show how many materials you need to make everything that you added and how many of those materials you have in your inventory, represented with orange, and in the dimensional depot, represented with purple. Otherwise, you can access the notes by opening any dialog box or menu in the game and moving your mouse to the right side of the screen. You'll see a small shadow animation appear, and clicking on this will open it up. Now you can type whatever notes you need, like making a checklist of the next few things you want to do. It also supports some formatting, including bolded text and checkboxes, which is really nice. You'll see that there's two sections for notes, one that's public and one that's private. Public notes are visible to everyone on the server, while private notes will only show up for you, meaning you can have server-wide projects as well as personal projects and keep them separated. Dimensional Depot. I'm sure at this point a lot of people are using the Dimensional Depot, plus I have a dedicated video about it which I'll link in the cards in the top right, so I will keep this section kind of brief. The Dimensional Depot is your own personal cloud storage for every item in the game. You can use Mercer spheres to build storage containers that can have items belted into them, and then they will upload to the dimensional storage. You can also drag and drop items directly from your inventory into an uploader built into the inventory system, as long as you've researched this in the MAM. All of those items will be accessible by any player in the game, and you can toggle whether you want building to draw from your inventory or the depot first. But either way, it makes exploration and building in the game so much easier, and solves the pain point of running back and forth between your storage and a new project when you run out of materials. Upload speed and stack size are both pretty low when you start, but you can use Mercer spheres to upgrade both in the MAM research. There are a lot of different ways to use the depot, but this is my preferred way. This expands on the storage room concept, which involves creating an easy-to-access room of storage containers that have just about every producible item in the game that you might want to use. Usually I tend to have just one building, making each item, and they inevitably back up until I take some out. Although items like concrete and whatever belt material you need for your current tier of belts are good candidates to have multiple machines working on. But then I just build a dimensional depot on top of each of these storage containers, and I have the containers empty into them. I very rarely need to access the storage room physically, since they are all passively filling at all times. The storage room concept is still useful though, as you can easily switch out which materials are being stored, and you don't have to run around the whole map to find out where you're uploading something from. Some centralization can still be helpful, and depots let you have the best of both worlds. Blueprints. If you haven't used blueprints, just know that they are a game changer, especially when it comes to organization. They speed up your building process, especially when making tedious and repetitive factories. It can be a cure for your own laziness, because the more tedium you have to trudge through while building, the more likely you are to skip the parts that keep the factory organized and clean. Instead, you just want to get it over with and get on with the rest of the game. So blueprinting something like a stack of conveyor poles or a clean row of constructors or even a pre-made roadway can help you speed up the boring parts. If you're like me and you're not really sure what you need, I highly recommend paying attention to the content creators you watch and seeing if they offer blueprints as part of supporting them on Twitch or YouTube or Patreon. You may notice I have some content creator blueprint packs here in my game, and these are super useful. Most content creators probably play this game more than a lot of us, so they've encountered many helpful situations where blueprints have saved them a lot of time. So I highly recommend seeing what some of them have put together if you're not sure what to create yourself. You can also use Blueprint Build Mode to seamlessly attach blueprints to each other and to existing infrastructure, whether it's belts, pipes, or railroad tracks. All of these connection points can extend out between blueprints, saving you a ton of time on connecting things and making sure that you don't miss anything. This will help you stay super organized and speed up building, since you can essentially extend your builds out super cleanly. This is especially useful for long belt highways or train bridges or anything just tedious and long and repetitive like that. Power lines. Power lines are probably one of the most difficult things to keep clean and satisfactory. It doesn't take much to have a mess of cables clipping through walls and going every which way. It's just hard to plan out your power routes for some reason. So here are my tips for keeping power lines organized. My easiest and most basic tip is to try to designate a central conduit block for your power. So in your factory, the main power line can follow this conduit, and then smaller production lines get their power branched off from this main line. This is in contrast to just kind of running your power from the source through your factory, and then every little sub-factory connects to the next one, and then if you break a power line somewhere or deconstruct a factory, you end up ruining your whole grid, and you don't know what went wrong. So I'll make this conduit, and then I'll start making little production lines and mini factories. And I like to put a power pole between each individual building and bring power all the way down the line, then essentially assign one power pole to each building. I even try to attach it from an angle that makes sense with the power connector on the building, so that the lines don't clip and actually look good, but this part's optional. The next level up of this is to ceiling mount your power. Essentially, you'll want to discreetly bring a power line up to the ceiling, and then you can use ceiling-mounted power connectors to run the power along the roof and then straight down to your machines. This will look messy in its own way, since you'll have power lines coming down from above, but the ground will be free from clutter. So it's just kind of whichever you prefer. I will say this also makes it easier to add lights to your factory since you already need to run power to the ceiling for those. The super next level of this, for the ultimate clean look, even though I wouldn't recommend this, is to bury power lines under factory buildings within the floors or the walls, bringing in power lines discreetly from below by clipping them through floors and the building itself. This method can look clean, but it becomes super hard to diagnose problems and to connect buildings to power, since you need to somehow access both sides of the floor or wall and potentially deconstruct foundations. Priority power switch. So that's how to keep your power lines themselves organized, but the priority power switch lets you organize your power grid in a different way. You can place down a priority power switch between two power lines, and the B side will create a new separate power grid section that you can name. From any priority power switch in the world, even one not connected to power, you can drag each of the sections you've made into different priority categories. If your grid's power production is too low to satisfy demand, the priority power switch will turn off sections starting with priority group 8 until the grid can sustain itself again. So you'll want to put power production sections in group 1 and less important outpost factories lower down. You can also manually toggle a section or a group to turn off and on the power to those sections. Having this representation of your power grid can be helpful during power failures and for decommissioning unneeded factories without going to visit them. Get in the habit of creating these sections to separate power plants and satellite factories once you have this item unlocked in the game. Just make sure you have a good understanding of which sections make what. You don't want to have only your nuclear plant on producing power only to realize that the factory that makes the fuel rods was on a lower priority and it's turned off now. Create traversable factories. The last tip for this video is a small one, and it's to make traversable factories. I would have said walkable, but I feel like that's not the right word, because with items like the hover pack, so few people actually walk on the ground in this game once they reach the mid-game. So you should aim for your factories to at least be traversable in whatever way you prefer. I personally think walkways look cool even if I don't always walk on them, and I try to incorporate them into my factories when possible. My number one tip for making traversable factories is to always build bigger than you think you need. Make the space wider and taller than you need, so you can leave room for walkways or at least enough open space to fly through without feeling cramped. Leave doors or passageways that lead to other rooms in the factory, and when possible make it obvious where those entrances and exits are, so you don't get lost. If you've created an extra large factory, you might even want to create a hypertube network to move you between important locations without you having to think too much about it. If you're building vertically, an elevator is the perfect tool to base your internal navigation off of. Create simple and easy hallways that lead to elevator doors, label the floors, and you'll be able to find what you're looking for just about every time. Hopefully now you're feeling a bit better about your messy factory. Don't be embarrassed by it. We've all been there. It takes time and practice to create those flawless, clean designs you see in screenshots. But with these tips and tools in your arsenal, the only limiting factor is your own desire. If you want to know how to use simple techniques to spice up your boring box factories, check out the suggested video that should be on your screen now.